All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. My apologies for the delay. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nissan, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Shirim and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel ben Zechariah and Sarah bas Avrohom. To also thank Avraham and Shaindy Kelman for dedicating all the Shirim this month in memory of Avram's mother, Sarah, Bryna, bas Yehoshua, Heschel, Zechariah. We hope to the merit of our Talmud Torah. All of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families in a chamar. Also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Samech Beis 62. And we are picking up a Meretz Hashem on Samech Beis. Second line down from the top. Thank you, Rabbi Richter, for giving yesterday's shir. So also we are picking up second line in Ihachi, Ish kiyafli neder be'erkicha be'erichin lamali. So as you remember again on yesterday's daf, on the beginning of the parak, so we're speaking about the idea. Well, first of all, the topic of the Mishnah was who could become a Nazir, right? So in that discussion, we're speaking about the fact that kusim, and in this context again, remember kusi represents not just the typical kusim, but non-Jews in general cannot become a Nazir. So the Gemara then segued into an interesting discussion regarding erchin. Remember again, what's erchin? Erchin means a person could go ahead and make a certain vow to pledge their value to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, in the world of erchin, so values are not subjective, but rather values are objective. The Torah creates multiple categories based on gender and age, and that becomes quote-unquote your value. So the Gemara made a statement when it comes to erchin that Ovdei Kochavim, non-Jews, cannot go ahead and make an erech vow, but what? They can be the subject of an erech vow. So we'll say, what does that mean? So for example, a Gentile could not say erki alai. Otherwise, you could say it, but if he says erki alai, such a statement is meaningless. Conversely, if a Jew were to say to a Gentile, erkicho alai, your value is upon me, the Gentile could be the subject of the neder, just could not be the vower himself. Fine. So that's the topic we're picking up with today. Ihachi, if that's the case, ish kiyafli neder be'erkicha be'erechin lamali. And we'll say specifically, when it comes to erechin, why do I need the phrase ish kiyafli? When a person will articulate a neder and erechin. I will say, now what's the shaila over here? Take a quick look at the Rush. So the Rush explains over here, first Rush on the page, left-hand margin. Ihachi ish kiyafli dichsiv rachmana gabe erchen lamali le'el darshinan minei l'rabos ovdei kochavim shene'erachin lamali. Why do I need this phrase? Why do I need this phrase? Now, so now what's the question? So the Gemara says, Michdi ha'iskish erchin l'nidarim. Now in general, again, erchin is compared to nidarim. Da'amar kra ish kiyafli neder be'erkicha, because what the Torah uses the same motion of yafli, of articulation, vatanya, and we learned gabi nedarim. We learned gabi by nedarim. Ish matam ish. We'll say when the Torah says ish by nedarim, what does ish come to teach us? So the Gemara says matam ish l'rabos asa ovdei kochavim sheinodrin nedarim unedavos ki Yisrael. Well, it's very interesting. Ish comes to teach us that a Gentile has the ability to go ahead and make a neder or a nedava, just like a Jew. Just like a Jew. Okay? Ish kiyafli be'erchin lamli. So if they'll say that's the case, then why do I need ish kiyafli by erchin? So again, if erchin are compared to nedarim, and by nedarim, ultimately again, the pasuk says, thank you. The pasuk says that halacha lamaisa ovei kochavim can make nedarim and nedavos. So based on that, if nedarim is compared, or if erchin is compared to nedarim, I would have thought that in the same way that a Gentile has the ability to go ahead and make nedarim and nedavos, he should also be subject to the laws of erchin. To which the Gemara says, elahai ish. Rather, again, the Gemara says the ish kiyafli by erchin mibayle la'asuye mufla samuch liish. So it's very interesting. It comes to include that halacha l'maisa as what we call a mufla samuch liish. We had this just a couple of days ago. Mufla samuch liish means the following: that halacha l'maisa, a boy between the ages of 12 and 13. So remember again, a boy between the ages of 12 and 13 is technically a katan. When it comes to nedarim, there's this interesting idea that as long as we are confident that he understands the concept of a neder, any neder he articulates is binding. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is as follows, that the phrase ish kiyafli neder be'erkicha is actually coming to include the concept that even a mufla samoch leish, even a boy who is not yet a gadol, but is in between the ages of 12 and 13, that halacha l'maisa, his erech vow should be binding. To which the Gemara says, that's fine. Hanicha l'man damar mufla samoch leish daraisa. So according to the opinion who says that the concept of a mufla samoch leish is a daraisa, that I understand the pasuk is coming to highlight this idea. Elman damar d'rabanan. But according to the opinion that says that the concept of ish mufla or mufla samoch leish, that a boy between the ages of 12 and 13, that his neder is binding, that this is not a da'oraisa, but rather it's a drabanan. Ish kiyafli lamali. Why do you need the phrase of ish kiyafli? So we'll say, remember, we're hyper-focused. All we're trying to figure out is it would appear that we have an extraneous phrase of ish kiyafli by erchin. We're just trying to figure out what to do with it. What to do with it. So the Gemara says, so fine, so first suggestion is it's coming to teach me mufla samoch leish, that a Jewish boy between the ages of 12 and 13 years old has the ability to make an erchin vow. To which the Gemara says, that's fine if you hold that the concept of mufla samoch leish is a daraisa, then the pasuk is coming to teach me it. But if you hold it's only a darabanan, then what do you do with the pasuk? To which the Gemara says, ki yesh mufla samoch leish da'ovid kochavim. So this is very interesting. So according to that approach, listen to this. Get ready for this drasha. According to the opinion who holds that mufla samoch leish, meaning that a Jewish boy between the ages of 12 and 13 has the ability to make a neder, according to the opinion that says that's drabanan, okay, he would use the pasuk of ish kiyafli by erkin, by erkin to teach me that a Gentile mufla samoch leish can make a binding neder. So we'll say, you hear what's happening over here? That halacha l'maisa, the opinion that holds that it's a drabanan for Jews, mufla samoch leish, would use ultimately again the phrase ish kiyafli be'erkicha to teach me that a mufla samoch leish by a Gentile is a daraisa. Now, I'll say, obviously, falling off your seat with that, right? How could that be? So, as I was say, what that would mean is that the halacha by a non-Jewish mufla samoch leish is daraisa, but by a Jew it's derabanan. So Rashi anticipates this question. Take a look at Rashi. It's almost right across in Rashi. La'asuye mufla samoch leish ha'ovei kochavim midaraisa nodrin nedarim va'al titama mishum dibi Yisrael im mufla samoch leish nodrin nedarim min haTorah shekei matzino bekama. So Rashi anticipates our question. So let me get this right. Right, a mufla samoch leish who is Jewish only has the ability to make binding nedarim midrabanan. And a mufla samoch leish who's a Gentile has the ability to make binding nedarim midaoraisa. So how could that be that a non-Jew is going to be more chomer than a Jew? So Rashi himself anticipates this, and he says, V'al titama mishum debi Yisrael in mufla samoch leish. I'm reading Rashi. Nojin nedarim min haTorah sheki matzina bekam makomos shechmira Torah ala ovid kochavim kikol b'shoro shel Kanani shehizik l'shoro shel Yisrael bein tam bein muad mishalim nezek shalim. Now we'll say for shel Yisrael shenagach shel Kanani bein tam bein muad pater. So we'll say Rashi points out over here we do find instances in halacha where we are more machmir on the Gentile than the Jew. So here he happens, according to the Gemara says Baba Kamo, about damages of a goring ox. Okay, without getting into the details of that, but Lamaisa, the Gemara Rashi is suggesting it's not so crazy that you could find a situation where you'd be more machmir with a Gentile than a Jew. So I'll say, so just pause here for just a second. So what we are currently suggesting is that the phrase ish kiyafli neder be'erkicha, which is again by erchin, that extraneous phrase is coming to teach us that a mufla samoch leish who's not Jewish has the ability to actually create a erech vow which is binding da'oraisa, versus a mufla samoch leish who is Jewish would only have the ability to do so midrabanan. Fine. To which the Gemara says, so I will say, listen to this. So that makes sense according to the opinion that says that Jews Right? Leman dar b'nei Yisrael ne'erachan ve'in of the chum ne'erachan yachol lo yehu ma'arichin. So, according to the opinion that says that ultimately, again, Jews have the ability to be the subject of an erach vow, and non-Jews do not. I might have thought yachol lo yehu ma'arichin. I might have thought that since non-Jews don't have the ability to be the subject of an erach vow, therefore what? Therefore they can't make one as well. Talmud lomar ish. So we'll say, therefore the pasuk is saying, remember again, according to this version over here, according to this version, what we are suggesting is that a non-Jew, even a mufla samach li'ish non-Jew, has the ability to make an erech vow, would not have the ability to be the subject of an erech vow. Elo, lemanda amar b'nei Yisrael ma'arichin, ve'no of dekochav ma'arichin. I will say, but according to the opinion that says that Jews have the ability to make an erech vow, non-Jews do not have the ability to make an erech vow. We'll say that's what we saw in yesterday's daf. So based on that, Yachol lo yuhu ne'erachin, I might have thought that a non-Jew can't be the subject of an erech vow as well. Talmud lomar ish afilu tinok ben chodesh bar aruchihu. Therefore, we'll say the pasuk says ish, and what does ish come to teach me? Anyone could go ahead and become the subject of an erech vow. Even a child who is 1 month old has the ability to be subject of an erech vow. I both say, well, if that's the case, kiyafli lamali. We're back to square one. So what do I do with the phrase ish kiyafli? So I will say, so remember again, we have two possibilities so far. We're just trying to figure out what to do with this phrase, ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha. If a person will articulate an erech vow, what do I do with it? I will say, because it is seemingly an extraneous phrase. Why is it an extraneous phrase? Because since erech vows are compared to nedarim, erech vow is a form of neder, ultimately I already have kiyafli by neder, so the kiyafli by erechin vows is extra. So we have two suggestions so far about what we could do with kiyafli. Number one, it comes to include a Gentile mufla ish or mufla samach leish. Number two, second possibility is that it teaches us that even a Gentile has the ability to articulate an erech vow. It's right to make an erech vow. So I will say, but the problem is, both of those interpretations have problems. As such, we're back to square one. Kiyafli lamali, amrabad dabar ava li'isuye oved kochavim gadol. Wow, let's listen to this. What does it come to include? It comes to include an adult akum, an adult Gentile. The afa gav the gadol who, even if he's an adult, eno yodea lahaflos. I will say, if halacha lamaisa, he does not understand the nature of nedarim and doesn't understand the nature of explicitness that is required in nedarim, his nedarim are not binding. So I will say here, what the Gemara is doing with this trasha is really focusing on the yafli. I will say yafli doesn't just mean an articulation, but rather yafli means an explicit articulation. So perhaps what it means to say over here is as follows. See, I will say, if a Jew makes a neder, as long as it's clear enough, it's going to work. But if a non-Jew makes a neder, ultimately, again, it is only binding if what? If kiyafli, if it's explicitly clear and he understands the exact mechanics of what it is that he's doing. Ele kiyafli, because of Rahman Agab Naziros Lamali. So I would say, if that's the case, then what do I need the kiyafli by Naziros? Because after all, we thought that that's what we learned by the yafli by Naziros. Michti, ha-iskish Naziros l'nedarim. After all, again, Naziros, ultimately, again, is compared to Nedarim. I will say, by the way, just the extension of that is, and Nedarim is compared to Erechin, or Erechin is compared to Nedarim. So, Kiyafli lamali. Why do I need the Kiyafli? To which the Gemara says, Li'isuye yadayim she'enon mochichos. So I will say that's different, because that Kiyafli by Nedarim comes to include, I will say, a little bit of Chazorah back to our Nedarim days. Yadayim she'enon mochichos. What's the number of that? What's a yad? What's a yad? A yad is a partial declaration. So we'll say yadayim she'enon mochichos means an ambiguous partial declaration. What is the status of yadayim she'enon mochichos? The itmar, listen to this. Yadayim she'enon mochichos. So we'll say if you have an ambiguous statement that is I should say a partial statement, a yad, so a partial declaration that's ambiguous. So we'll say, what do you do with that? Abaye amar havyin yadayim. Abaye says it's a yad. It works. Rava says, Lo havin yadayim. It does not work. It's not a yad. So la Abaye necha. So it's according to Abaye, this makes sense. Because ultimately, again, Kiyafli is coming to teach me that what? Even yadayim she'inon mochichos is still called the yad. El Rava, according to Rava, ultimately what is there to say? Ella kiyafli mibayle l'chedra b'tafel. So we'll say, again, remember, the good news over here is, it's one topic, right? What are we just trying to figure out? What am I doing with kiyafli? That's all. What am I doing with kiyafli? Rabbi says the Gemara, Ella kiyafli mibayle l'chedra b'tarfon. Rather, I will say, ultimately, again, I need kiyafli like Rabbi Tarfon. What does Rabbi Tarfon teach me? The Sanya, Rabbi Yehuda Amish Rabbi Tarfon, Ein echad mehem Nazir, lefi shelo nitna naziros ela lahafla. So I will say, so now remember again, this is focusing now really on the kiyafli by naziros. So now listen to this. We had this was a Mishnah on Lamed days. But remember this case, a group of people are walking together, right? And one guy says, and they see someone approaching them, but it's not clear who's approaching them. So one of the guys says, if that's Ruvain who's approaching me, I'm a Nazir. Right? The other guy says, if it's not Ruvain, I'm a Nazir. Third guy, right? So I will say, remember we had a whole variety of these cases. So what's the halach over here? So Rabbi Tarfon says, Ein echad mehem Nazir. Rabbi Tarfon says, in a case like this, none of them are considered to be a Nazir. Now we'll say, now why not? Lefi shelo nitna naziros ela lahafla. I will say, because Rabbi Tarfon understands that the lashon of kiyafli, when it comes to Naziros, teaches me that what? Naziros only works if it is an explicit articulation. In this case over here, you're missing some of the explicivity, right? Because what happens was because there is some level of ambiguity. Why? Because what? Why? Because each of them are hinging their Naziros on the identity of the person who is coming towards them, and no one is 100% sure about who it is that's approaching them. So therefore, B'tarfon is of the opinion that kiyafli means the zirus only takes place when there is an explicit articulation. To which the Gemara says, Hanuch Rabbi Tarfon, fine. Al Rabbanon, but I will say, according to the Rabbanon who hold that in that case, on the Mishnah Lamed days, they hold that halacha l'maisa, even an inexplicit articulation of nazirus is still going to work. So ma'ikal, what do you do with kiyafli? Rather, I will say you need it for the following brayso. Listen to this. Heter nedarim parchin ba'avir. I will say the concept of heter nedarim. Now, remember, there are two ways you can be matir a neder. Right? Number one is you go before a beis din. Number two, yochin mumcha. You can go to an individual expert. So the Gemara suggests over here the concept of heter nedarim, something that's parchin ba'avir. Parchin ba'avir means literally it's suspended in the air. Meaning, I will say that you're not going to find psukim that really highlight the process of hataras nedarim. It is a process that's porech ba'avir, floats in the air. Ve'in lahem amashi yismuchu. And ultimately, again, they have very little on what to rely on. And I will say, what does that mean? The Gemara is not knocking the institution of hataras nedarim, but rather what the Gemara is just highlighting is you don't really have psukim. Right? Remember, again, we learn out these concepts from a variety of drashas. This is the lashon of poreach ba'avir. Rabbi Eliezer Omer yesh lahem amashi yismuchu. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's not true. They have what to rely on. How so? By the way, if you take a quick look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, 2 lines up from the bottom, Rashi says, heter nedarim parachin ba'avir, ha'olam parachin ba'avir ha'olam, she'en lahem mikra min ha'torah mashi yismuchu. We'll say the concept of hataras nedarim, be it by a beis din of 3, or be it by yochin mumcha, there's no pasuk. There's no pasuk. Remember again, we saw the drashas, but Lamai said there's no pasuk which supports this process, which we'll say is fascinating in and of itself. So that's what it's called, parchin ba'avir. So we're saying, now watch this. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's not true. They're not parchin ba'avir. There is a pasuk that supports the idea of hataras nedarim. What is it? Ish kiyafli. So we'll say, ish kiyafli shtei pa'amim. And we'll say the Torah itself uses the lashon of kiyafli ultimately twice. Ultimately, as well. So by the way, the twice is one is by erchin and one is by nazir. One is by erchin and one is by nazir. And I will say, what does that articulation of kiyafli twice? Well, this is incredible. What does it teach us? Echad hafla'a le'iser, ve'echad hafla'a leheter. So we'll say, ultimately, again, one is to go ahead and speak about the articulation for iser, and one is speaking about the articulation, ultimately, again, for heter. So we'll say, I'll show you something interesting. If you take a quick look, actually just look at Rashi. Rashi says, Echad hafla le'iser, shalavat las haneder kishein lo bocharata. So I'll say, so this is actually interesting. Rashi understands hafla le'isr means that at the end of the day, if you want to go ahead and be mavatal your neder, you need explicit charata, and leheter ultimately is when there is charata. The Rosh understands this differently. The Rosh says echad hafla le'isr means that if you want to make a neder which restricts you, you need to have explicit articulation. And halacha l'maisa, if you want to be released from the neder, you need explicit articulation either about charata or about a pesach. So this is how the Gemara concludes. So remember again, this whole sugya was all what do I do with the kiyafli, right? And remember again, we have two kiyaflis. One kiyafli by Erchin, which is how this discussion got started, and one kiyafli ultimately again by Nazirus. So we'll say, what do I do with the kiyaflis? So the conclusion of the Gemara ultimately is that one kiyafli is to teach me that a neder could only be affected if it is explicitly articulated, and the second kiyafli teaches me that a neder could only be undone, or could only be matir, could only be nitar, ultimately again through some level of explicivity as well. Whether that's explicivity in charata or it's explicivity in Pesach. That's the kiyafli. Kiyafli for the creation of the neder, ultimately again kiyafli for the dissolution of the neder. I will say, what do you do about non-Jews and erchin? Right? What's the halach over there? So the Rambam Pask is actually really like we saw in the beginning of the Gemara in yesterday's daf, namely that halacha l'maisa, an ovid kochavim cannot make an erech vow, but an Ovid Kochavim can be the subject of an Erech vow. So if an Ovid Kochavim were to say, Er ki alai, my value is upon me, that neder is a meaningless neder. Even though I want to be clear, an Ovid Kochavim can make other nidarim and nidavos. It just happens to be unique, like we saw in the Drush in the Gemara yesterday, that Allah Chamaisa Erech vows only apply to Jews. Only Jews make Erech vows. So if you were to say Er ki alai, such a neder would be meaningless. That being said, if a Jew were to say to a Gentile, Erkecha alai, that would actually be a binding vow for the Jew. And I will say you would just use the values of the Torah depending on age and gender to assess the value of the akum. Incredible. Good, I will say Samach Beis and Beis, the Mishnah. New Mishnah. So the Mishnah says as follows: Homer ba'avonim mi benashim. So remember again, we saw in the previous Mishnah that both of them, remember again, what kind of avodim are we talking about over here? An Eved Kinani, right? Because remember again, an Eved Ivri is a full-fledged Jew. Just to be clear, so of course an Eved Ivri can become a Nazir, and of course an Eved Ivri could do whatever. An Eved Ivri is an employee, right? And more like almost like a type of indentured servant, but he definitely still has his own spiritual autonomy. So the Eved they're talking about over here is an Eved Kinani. So remember again, we spoke about the idea that both an Eved and an Isha could go ahead and become a Nazir. Well, watch this. Chomer va'avad mi benashim shu mefer nidre ishto ve'eno mefer nidre avdo. So I will say, interestingly enough, a man has the ability to be mefer his wife's neder naziros, but doesn't have the ability to be mefer his eved's neder naziros. And I will say, now remember, let's clarify something very important over here. So remember, I will say, we saw in the previous Mishnah that the master has the ability to force his Eved to violate his Naziros, right? But he doesn't have the ability to dissolve the Eved's Naziros. As opposed to, let's say, his wife's Naziros. Again, I will say, a husband has the ability to be made for his wife's Nidarim. So therefore, again, Nazir is a form of Nidarim. And therefore, again, he has the ability to go ahead and be made for his wife's Neder, but can't be made for the Eved's Neder. The Eved's Neder. Yeah, good. Hefer li'ishto, hefer lamas. If Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa, if he was mefer his wife's neder, ultimately, again, remember again, that hafara is forever. I was saying, remember again, we actually learned this. What does that mean? Reuven's married to Rachel. Rachel decides they're going to become a Nazir, a Nazira. What happens? Reuven hears about it. What does he say? No way. Then Rabbi say, what happens? They get into a whole fight and then they get divorced. So Rabbi says, what's the halacha? What's the halacha about a Nazir Nazirus? It's done. Once a husband, remember also we had this machlokas about how does hafara work? Is hafara like only suppression or is it annulment, right? In other words, does it just suppress the neder for marriage, but then after marriage the neder comes back, or ultimately again, or as an annulment. So it's annulment. So therefore, the Mishnah says, halacha l'maisa, even if they get divorced, or for that matter, if he dies, the neder is still voided. Right? Hefer alamis. Conversely, hefer la'avdo, we'll say if a master is made for the neder of his eved, yotza l'cherus u'mishayim l'zirus. And I will say now, the wording is a little bit misleading, because what did we just say before? That a master what? Can't be made for the neder. So when it uses the lashon of hefer over here, it doesn't literally mean made for. What it means is, a master does have the ability to force his eved to violate the neder nazirus, but yet, again, upon emancipation, death of the adon, whatever kind of emancipation, so ultimately, again, the eved will be required to go ahead and fulfill his neder nazirus. So we'll say it's incredible. So that is the halacha. We'll say if you take a look, fine. Tosas points this out. Tosas says, "Hefer la'avdi yotzel achirus kishenishtacher ve'achar mashlim." So hefer lav dafka ela kolomar micha. So as Tosas points this out, that the Mishnah is using the lashon of hefer, but it doesn't mean it's using it in the legal sense. Because remember, again, we just said a master doesn't have the ability to be mefer the neder nazirus of his slave. The only thing he can do is he could object to the slave's performance, or the performance of the wrong word, to the slave's fulfillment, right, of this neder, and he could force him to go ahead and violate it. So those just point out the lashon of hefer that they're using over here is not an accurate lashon. Fine, says the Gemara. Ten rabbanon lema rabbo kofos. So let's talk about this. Now, what we've established is that halacha l'maisa, an eved has the ability to take a neder nazirus, but the master also has the ability to what? To force him to violate that neder nazirus. So the Gemara says like this: Tan rabbanon lema rabbo kofa. So we'll say what are the cases? What are the cases? Ultimately, again, in which a master has the ability to force his eved to violate. To which the Gemara says, Dafka l'nazirus. So we'll say, when does a master have the ability to force his eved to go ahead and violate the terms of his neder? It's dafka for nazirus. Aval lo l'nedarim. So we'll say, ula erchim. So we'll say, but not for nedarim and not for erchim. So if the eved, for example, made a different kind of neder, the master does not have the ability to force him to violate it. Similarly, again, for erchin, the master would not have the ability to force him to violate. To which the Gemara says, Ma'ishna gabi Nazir, dam rachmana le'esar isra al nafsho. So we'll say, I'm sorry, Ma'ishna gabi Nazir. So why is it? So we'll say, so obviously, what comes out is, an eved does have the ability to make nedarim. Does have the ability to do so. So we'll say, so why is it that by Nazir, the master has the ability to force the eved to violate his neder nazirus, but yet the master doesn't have the ability to do that by other nedarim? To which the Gemara says, very simple. I will say, when it comes to nazirus, the Torah uses the lashon of le'eser isra al nafsho. Someone is making a prohibition upon his nefesh. From what do we dash from that? B'mi shenafsho kinuyalo. Who can become a nazir? I will say, someone whose nefesh belongs to him. Yotza eved she'ein nafsho kinuyalo. It will say this comes to include an eved, because it will say, what's the chapa in eved? And ein nafsho kinuyalo. I will say, now what does that mean? What does that mean? An eved does not own himself. Right? An eved ultimately, again, is owned by the master. So because he's owned by the master, therefore what? The master could force him to go ahead and violate his neder nazirus. We'll say, so just to be clear, what's happening over here is, if an eved makes a neder nazirus, does it work? Does it work? Does it work? Yeah, that's the opening Mishnah of this parak. It does work. We'll say, the chiddush over here is, the master has the ability to force his eved to violate the neder nazirus. To violate the neder nazirus. Now again, the master doesn't have the ability to void the neder nazirus. That he only has the ability to do by who? By who? Or a man has the ability to do by who? By his wife. Hafara. So he doesn't have the ability to void the neder nazirus, but he does have the ability to go ahead and make the eved violate it. So the Gemara is trying to figure out, why is that? Why is that? To which the Gemara says, because the only person who has the ability to make a really upstanding, binding neder nazirus is le'esar isra al nafsho, someone who owns his nefesh. But ultimately, again, the eved does not own his nefesh. I will say, there's such a beautiful Musar Heschel in this lashon. Listen to this lashon. The Gemara says, "B'misha nafsho kinuyalo, yotze eved she'ein nafsho kinuyalo." What's still chap of an eved? An eved does not own his nefesh, right? His nefesh is owned by the master. So Rabbi say, we are avodim to the Ribono Shalom. We are avodim to the Ribono Shalom. So if that's the case, then what does that tell us? An eved, a nafsho kinuyalo. Who owns the nefesh? Who owns the nefesh of the eved? The master owns the nefesh of the eved. See, Rabbi say, this piece of that line is perhaps one of the most important lines in Shas. Why is tshuva possible? Why is tshuva possible? I make mistakes, and I make dramatic mistakes. I make terrible mistakes, horrific mistakes in life. And I feel like I totally divest myself of any last shred of holiness. Yet the concept of tshuva says that I have the ability to lift myself back up, to do something in life, and to totally spiritually rehabilitate myself. Why is that possible? Also, you know why it's possible? Because ultimately, again, yotze eved she'ein nafsho kinuyalo. Because at the end of the day, my nefesh does not belong to me. Who does my nefesh belong to? It belongs to the Adam. It belongs to the Ribono Shalom. And because of that, I will say, there is always a piece of me that I cannot defile. There is always a piece of me that I cannot corrupt. There is always a piece of me that remains untainted. No matter how abhorrent my personal behavior becomes, there's a piece of my spirituality which always remains intact because the Adon owns the nefesh. The Eved does not. The Adon owns it. So my nefesh, my neshama, is effectively owned by the Ribono Shalom. And because of that, I can mess up a lot of things, but my neshama I cannot taint. Elokai, neshama shenasata bi TORAH, ato yitzarta, ata berasa. It's yours. We say it every single morning. It's yours. And because it's yours, you can't take something that doesn't belong to you, I will say. This is why the entire concept, the entire enterprise of tshuva is possible, mamish, because it doesn't just give us incredible hope. Because sometimes like we do things and we think like, oh, I've messed up so badly, there's nothing I could do to pull myself out of this one. It's not true. No matter how bad the mistake, rehabilitation and tshuva is always possible. Why? Yotze eved she'ein nafsho kinuyalo. Incredible. Ihochi, afilu gabi nedarim nami. I will say if that's the case, then by nedarim as well. In other words, why don't say something by neder? Right? I will say at the end of the day, a master should be able to go ahead and tell the eved that force him to violate his nedarim. And what's the case? We'll say, watch this. Kigon shahaya eshkol shel anovim. Munach is interesting. Maybe the case is as follows. The case is where there was a cluster of grapes sitting in front of the Eved. And what happens? So the Gemara says like this. Now, Gabe Nedarim, so now we'll say what happens. Gabe Nedarim, Misar B'Hailo, Misar B'Achrini, L'Matzi Kafile. So we'll say, so now if the Eved is going to make a neder, not to eat this cluster of grapes, no big deal. Why? Because if he doesn't eat this one, then what? He'll eat the next one. However, Gabi Naziros, Tichi Misar Bahai Issar Bekulu, also when it comes to Naziros, if he answers this cluster of grapes, then what? He becomes Asr all cluster of grapes. Now, why does this matter? So Rashi points out, it matters a lot. Why? Because the Adon does not want his Eved abstaining from things. Why? Because that'll weaken the Eved. And a weakened Eved represents what? Diminished productivity. Diminished productivity, right? This is not really about the welfare of the Eved, right? This is about productivity. Right? So the Maisa, again, say if the Eved is going to make a neder not to eat a particular cluster of grapes, fine, don't eat that one, you'll eat something else, productivity will not be diminished. But if there's one cluster of grapes, and now he goes out and he becomes a Nazir, and he can't eat any cluster of grapes, that represents an existential fear of diminished productivity. That's where an Adon is going to step in and shut this down. I begabi nedarim milo askinon. The leka ela high eshkol. So I'll say maybe the case in Adarim is where there's only one cluster of grapes. The ilo achale chalish. And if the Eved does not eat this cluster of grapes, then what? He's not going to have another form of sustenance. He will be weakened, and there will be diminished productivity. So why shouldn't the Adon be able to step in and force him to violate this neder? Ela amarava kegon shayach hartzon munach lefanav. We'll say, what's the case? The case is where there's a grape seed sitting in front of the Eved. So now watch this. And the Eved wants to answer the grapeseed to himself. So he'll say, by Nidarim, it's okay. The Eved wants to make a neder not to go and eat the grapeseed. Go right ahead. Go right ahead, fine. You don't eat this one, you'll eat a different one. Gabi Nazir, the Israel Bachrini Matzi Kafile. He'll say, but by Nazir, it's not, if he answers the grapeseed, not only can he not eat this grapeseed, but what? He also can't eat any other grapeseed. Well, then the Eved could become weakened. That represents the fear of diminished productivity. The Gabi Nedarim, Milo Askin, Duleka, Ella, Hai Chard, son. By Nedarim, also, maybe we have to be concerned that there's only this grapeseed. And if he doesn't eat it, he's mamish going to become weakened. And we'll say, if that's the case, the other should be able to step in even with what? Even with just a neder. Here we go. So we'll say, Sabai says, when does the Adon feel the need to step in and force violation? That's only in the Nazirus. Right? That's only in the Nazirus. Rabbi said, listen to this. This is actually fascinating. The Gemara says, Abayi says, an Adon doesn't have to see, the only case where Adon has to step in, Abba says, where? Is Nazirus. Now, why is that? Because we'll say, what happens when an Eved makes an Ed Nazirus? What happens? It works. What's the concern ultimately with an Ed Nazirus? That the Eved is going to be weakened, right? And that's going to represent diminished productivity. That's where an Adon has the right. Now, he doesn't have, remember, if the Adon is happy that his right, can you imagine, right? The Adon, Reuven has an Eved Kenani. Eved Kenani becomes a Nazir. So maybe Reuven is going to say, beautiful. Clearly, again, being an Eved Kenani in my home is having such a hashba, right? He hears me doing the daf, right? Now he wants to become a Nazir as well. So could the Adon not do anything and let his Eved be a Nazir? Sure. Right? You must remember again, we're not saying that Adon has to step in. We're saying an Adon has a right to suppress. Now remember, he can't annul the neder. He doesn't have that power. But he does have the ability to suppress the neder. And suppression comes in the form of telling the Eved, forcing the Eved to drink wine, to eat grapes. The Adon has that power. Sabai says that's because when an Eved makes an Ed Nazirus, it works. But Abba said, listen to this. This is actually incredible. The Gemara says, however, when it comes to Nidarim and a Shvuah, there's no need. Ultimately, again, an Adon does not have to go ahead and force his Eved to violate a neder or a shvuah in the event that that neder or shvuah is what? Is detrimental to his role as an Eved Kenani. Why not? My Torah will say is incredible. Damar kra, lahara, o lehetiv. They will say the pasuk by shvuah, or I should say, by shvuah, right, which also applies to nedarim, is lahara, o lehetiv. Maha tava rishus, right, ultimately af hara rishus. So we'll say, listen to this. The Torah says as follows, O nefesh ki sishava levate bisvasayim, lahara, o lehetiv. So we'll say, if a person will take a shvuah, with something that is beneficial, something that's detrimental. Now we'll say, now watch this. The same way when you take a shvuah, ultimately hatava, the good thing that you're going to do is within your purview, within your discretion. So too, if you're going to do something detrimental, it has to be within your purview and discretion. Af hara rishos, yotza lahara la'achin u'shein rishos biyado. Now we'll say what this has come to exclude. This comes to exclude taking a neder, taking a shvuah, which is detrimental to someone else. That you don't have the right to do. Now we'll say, now this is a general halacha that you are not permitted to go ahead and take a shvuah or a neder that is detrimental. For example, the Rash points out over here, Shem nishpa sheyake es ploni eina shvuah chala. So let's listen to this. I take a shvuah, I swear I'm going to punch Reuven in the face. Right? So I'm very from Motzos Vasecha Tishmar. Right? Reuven, man up, take it like a man, right? I'm giving you the opportunity to help me grow my ruchnius. Right? I took a shvuah, I want to fulfill it. So we'll say there's no such shvuah like that. There's no such shvuah. Why is there no such shvuah? Because what we learn out is lahara lahetiv, the same way that lahetiv means something that's within my discretion that I could do. So too lahara means that it's in my discretion as well. This comes to exclude a neder or a shvuah that has negative consequences or implications on someone else, such a shvuah or a neder is not even chal to begin with. So if I take a shvuah to punch Reuven in the face, there's no shvuah like that. There's no shvuah like that. By extension, you take a neder that adversely impacts someone else, no such neder like that. Now watch this. This is incredible. Therefore, watch this. When a Eved Kinani takes a neder or a shvuah that is going to negatively impact his master, they will say, what is the nature of that neder or shvuah? What's the nature of that? It's void. In other words, it never gets off the ground. So I will say, so for example, I'll give you a perfect example of this. A Eved Kinani makes a neder shvuah shelo ochal. I take a shvuah, I'm not going to eat this. Or, right, neder al kikar zu. I'm not going to eat that loaf. These vows, these oaths, don't get off the ground. They don't get off the ground. And therefore, Abu said, this is incredible. Therefore, the Gemara says it like this. Herein lies the distinction between Nazirus and between Neder and Shvuah. So Abu said, Nazirus does get off the ground. Because it gets off the ground, and it could be potentially detrimental, so what's the halacha? Master has the right to what? Step in, suppress. Right? SIS, step in, suppress, right? He has the ability to do that because the Nazirus itself works. This doesn't come up in other cases of Nedarim and Shavuos. Why not, Rabbi? Because there's a built-in mechanism which by definition voids Nedarim and Shavuos, which have detrimental effects on other people. So although technically speaking, the Nazir, the Eved Kinani, does have the ability to make a neder, or does have the ability to make a shvuah, if that neder or shvuah is in any way detrimental to his master. Now we'll say, how is a neder or shvuah detrimental to his master? If in some way it results in diminished output, right? Diminished productivity. So they will say, it never even gets out of the gate. Right? It's dead on arrival. In other words, it doesn't, nothing ever happens. It's voided. It's voided. So also I said, therein lies the distinctions. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, so also if we kind of round this out, if we round this whole thing out, so halacha l'maisa, what comes out over here is, when a wife makes a neder nazirus, husband has the ability to be made for that neder. But the din about Farah, of course, is only a concept between a husband and a wife. Therefore, when Ruvain's Eved Kinani goes and makes a neder nazirus, as we've already demonstrated, halacha l'maisa, the neder works. But master has the ability to suppress the neder if in any way it diminishes productivity. But Nazir stands in contradistinction to neder or shvuah. Because neder or shvuah, if in any way they represent diminished productivity from the beginning, halacha l'maisa, there's no need for any type of suppression. Why? Because it's voided mitchila. I just want to say, we'll stop over here for today. I just want to do just a few moments of Sha'ar B'tachon. Emir Hashem. I'll say tremendous shkayach, beautiful daf, with an incredible Musar Haskell as well. All right, so let's just get in. We only have a few moments, but let's get in.